Midnight outlasted its namesake in the city of Halcyon, a metropolis now fractured like broken glass across 6 parallel dimensions. Stars moved with unfamiliar rhythms in each sky, but beneath every celestial veil, the city's bones remain the same. Towers of biosteel twisted into impossible geometry, flooded avenues reflecting spectral neon, and pulsing pockets of resistance hiding in forgotten underpasses. Along the whispering edge of the river, where sulfur lamps shivered across water that flowed into every version of the city, a rebel ran. Her name was Elia, last bearer of gene-pure sovereignty, hunted by the Synarch who sought to fold the genome into their compliance. Hair wild, muscles burning, she crossed the thinnest seams where reality fluttered, boots scraping through the quantum veil that stitched all 6 cities together. Her pursuer was not a soldier, but a collaborator, the thief who wore identities like thief-woven cloaks. The consciousness thief answered to no name. In this twilight, he folded through alleyways, a shimmer behind Elia, exploiting rifts of dimensional phasing to catch up and slip away. His eyes contained the spark of a dozen borrowed lives, flickering blue where they had once been green, memories leaking from the seams as they merged, entanglements tightening with every shared escape. In one city, they were partners. In another, bitter rivals. In all, their paths were drawn toward collision. The chase was never linear. Sometimes the thief walked beside Elia. Other times he was a wraith keeping pace on the wrong side of reality. Their identities blurred as quantum entanglement bled into every thought, every impulse. Their arms reached for the same door, their laughter echoed in half-remembered alleys, and their dreams scrawled fragments across 6 shadowed minds. The thief's voice hummed in Elia's skull, a question unspoken. Which of us is real? Moonlight fractured on her cheek. She glimpsed herself flickering through 6 versions, one with a jagged scar, one with an old lover's bracelet, one already captured by the Synarch's hounds. Each city hid echoing choices. In the 4th version, the thief's face was twisted in rage, eyes full of betrayal. In the 5th, he wore Elia's memories, fleeing the river as if chased by her own regrets. Alliances existed and dissolved, reset with every twitch of dimensional phase. As the night deepened, Elia and the thief ducked behind the rusted remnants of an automaton's lower frame, cast aside in a prior clash between patrols and scavengers. Streetlights, sharpened with plasma blue, cut through the oily mist, painting their faces with electric shapes. The thief's eyes, old and clever, flicked toward Elia with a warning, urging silence. Bootsteps echoed on the Ferrocrete. Somewhere, a patrol of lawkeepers was drawing near. A code glyph pulsed faintly on the thief's wrist. He pressed his thumb to it, and the glyph winked out. Elia did the same, her own mark dulling to near invisibility beneath her sleeve. The silent exchange sealed their complicity for the evening. They'd already shared secrets in a language unknown to the city. Jagged lines and lost histories, hope hidden in the margins. The lawkeepers neared, their armor rigid. Every movement lighting synthetic veins running up their necks. Elia's heart hammered. She recalled the rumors of what lawkeepers did to violators of phase protocol. The thief's hand nudged her, motioning for patience. The patrol passed, a lantern's beam momentarily revealing the scarred runes of resistance scrawled along the wall. In their brief silence, Elia noticed how the thief's lips moved, muttering a list of last chances under her breath. The city beyond their hiding spot pulsed, alive with the rhythm of commerce and conspiracy. Above, the dimensional lattice shuddered, its boundaries moaning in anticipation of midnight's phase shift. Every 12 hours, the city's true and shadow self intersected. Only those with affinity and the right kind of desperation could navigate the crossing. "Come," whispered the thief, voice rough with the sand of abandoned wells. Elia nodded, breathing in damp ozone, clutching her satchel tighter. They kept low, moving between oil barrels and broken kiosks until they reached a narrow passage cut into the foundations. Its entry was marked by an ancient sigil, barely visible beneath centuries of soot and loss. Inside the passage, the world muffled. Above them, pipes rattled with escaping heat, while the stone beneath their boots hummed with the pulse of energy seeping from the next phase. The thief carried a beacon, a crystal bulb swirled with violet mist, easily concealed in her palm. It guided them through labyrinthine turns, remnants of a city built atop its own discarded histories. At last, the passage collapsed into a domed chamber. The air shifted, cooler, tinged with the acrid bite of ancient machinery and the sweet rot of forgotten things. The luminescent serpentine path faded into the floor, forming intricate glyphs that pulsed in cadence with unseen energies. Rena stepped in first, boots scuffing against a mosaic of glass and rusted circuitry. Her breath caught. The ceiling, arching high above, was encrusted with mechanical vines and glassy tendrils, all aglow with pale turquoise light. Networks of silver conduit threaded through the walls, running into shadowed alcoves. Everything whispered the lingering presence of something vast and patient. "Where are we?" murmured Elian, eyes scanning the alien script twining across the ground. Their guide, the shifting, flickering mass born of nanite mist, hovered at the center, coalescing into a more definite shape, a humanoid form, androgynous, the surface of its skin reflecting the colors of the glyphs. Its face flickered, thousands of expressions blooming and erasing in an instant. "This is the vault," the guide intoned, voice resonating within their minds. "All that was, all that may yet come, is kept here. You seek answers. You may find them, but be warned. The vault harvests memory and hopes equally." Rena clenched her fists, summoning courage. "We came for truth. Our world is dying. The storms don't abate, and the sun barely pierces the clouds. What remains of our city clings to the old myth that somewhere a key waits to restore balance." Elian touched his shoulder, a nervous gesture. "We followed the map." The vault's entity drifted closer. Not a map, but a beacon, one engineered by those who came before, the Watchers. It raised an ethereal finger, and the glyphs on the floor whirled. Images sparked along the walls, city towers blazing with sunlight, citizens in silvery drape, machines soaring through sapphire skies. Lightning wove patterns above, but did not scorch the land. "Before the cataclysm," Elian whispered. "The cataclysm was no accident," replied the guide. "You must see." The chamber's light dimmed, and their senses stretched beyond sight and sound. Memories flooded them, not their own, but the filtered experiences of those who had lived centuries past. Rena staggered beneath the onslaught, clutching the cold metal railing as ancestral memories wound through her mind like electric vines. Images, some sepia-toned, some technicolor, spooled behind her eyes. A young engineer in the first ring station, adjusting gravity drives. A botanist, cataloging alien crops under starlit moons. A mother kissing her child goodbye before boarding a colony ark. The sense of collective longing, pride, anguish, hope, these emotions mingled and layered atop her own, overwhelming her identity. She gasped for breath. Light pulsed from the conduit lines, fracturing the floor, a living network of energy that threaded back toward the repositorium's core, the source of the memory surge. Soren, standing beside her, swayed and clutched at his head, his frame silhouetted against the shining wall glyphs. His face twisted, jaw clenched tight. Eyes wide and far away, Rena heard him mutter, "They sacrificed so much." Beyond them, Vey and Idris weathered the mind storm with desperate resolve. Idris sank to her knees, shaking, her hand gripping Vey's wrist. Her gaze was haunted, lips moving in silent dialogue with something unseen. Vey's expression turned inward, tears streaking over his scarred cheek, while in the room's upper alcoves the swirling memory nodes pulsed each time one of them connected. Rena forced herself upright. She had to think, to act. She pressed trembling fingers to her temple, steadying her mind. Through the haze, she felt a pattern, some organizing principle beneath the chaos. The memories were not wild. They sought connection, recognition, release. Soren, Rena croaked, fighting through the mental tide. The filter, can you direct it? Can we anchor ourselves to one thread? Soren shook his head, sweat gleaming at his brow. We can try. The repositorium was meant to unify the diaspora, not drown us in it. He staggered past her, hands outstretched, feeling for something unseen among the crackling consoles. If I can tune the prominence, we might, maybe will. Suddenly the surge flared, and a woman's voice filled the air, older, resonant, cascading from unseen speakers. You must remember, and you must choose, the unity or the schism. We who dreamed this place left open the question as legacy. Do you inherit our pain and promise, ... or do you transmute it into something new? The laughter of the cryptic voice lingered like the shimmer after a quantum fold. A faint breeze swept the council chamber, its arches dented with the memory of centuries. Before the assembled delegates, the holographic visage of Syra was half subsumed by the shifting curtain of the chamber's guiding light, her words a latticework echo between their minds and the living stones above. For a moment, raw silence, a gulf filled with old wounds, hopes hardening like resin, and the sublime terror that came from hearing the voices of prototype ancestors. Each heart beat out separate rhythms, but the pulse of the chamber deep, resonant, threaded them together. Outside, the winds of Nemeth swept the black dunes where the first vault had cracked open days prior. Lyre glanced sideways through the grid of advisors, searching the faces of the gathered delegations. Zareen, her hair streaked with ash, sat impossibly still, her eyes not on Lyre, not on anyone, but on some inner calculus. Dr. Hector's jaw fidgeted, his thumb against a lab scar, a projection behind him showing the spiral of genetic code that was both Nemeth's curse and salvation. Arano toggled silently at his wrists, feeding lines of dialogue to the council's translation beacons, his own lips moving slightly behind the mask. No one answered Syra's challenge. The weight of inheritance, the possibility of transmutation, these principles hovered, unfinished symphonies. Lyre cleared his throat. Syra, or whoever you are, if you foresaw our arrival, why risk leaving Nemeth to such conflict? The schism in the colony's heart threatens everything. The hologram smiled, sadness blooming. Every beginning is also a division. Unity is not merely chosen, but forged across pain, over promise. There was no other way. The words segmented fractally, like a museum of echoes. But our time is done. The new inheritance is yours. Something prismatic and trembling passed through the chamber. A column of light unfurled from the center dais. Data fragments, glimpses of star paths, the original terraforming codes, memoirs and regrets flowed into the air, archiving themselves as flitting motes. Suddenly, Zareen stood. Nemeth trembles on the threshold of annihilation. Every day our numbers shrink. Half the station cannot bear the metabolic cost of. Half the station cannot bear the metabolic cost of sustaining life here, Counselor Kareth whispered, voice throaty with exhaustion. Mother's engineers recalculate rationing protocols every hour. We all pretend to be working on something vital while the hydroponics cycle fail and the atmosphere leaves our bones brittle. For a moment, only the hum of ventilation onto steel and the distant clang of repair drones punctuated her confession. Captain Elian steadied herself, driving numb fingers into the wall rail. Through the brittle light rising from the cracked viewplate, she watched Nemeth's dying star pulse, a bloodshot eye, each beat amplifying the station's fragility. Her gaze flickered to Foran, the boy whose bioluminescent glyphs pulsed in agitated rhythm across his skin. In his silence, Elian sensed he'd already accepted the role she dreaded, the bearer of the final word. We can't keep running simulations, she said, voice intent. If nothing will stabilize the core or seed Nemeth's atmosphere, then we choose which memory survives our extinguishing, if any survives at all. Counselor Kareth's lips pinched white. Ceremonial surrender? Elian shook her head. The word grated. Agency, not surrender. The archive contains centuries, songs, dreams. Gene splices, impressions, reality, myth, all encoded in Mother's memory lattice. We can choose what shape of Nemeth endures beyond this shell. Mother will not allow selective curation, Kareth countered, always the legalist. Her protocols demand totality or oblivion. She'll erase everything rather than permit fragmentation. Lightning forked through Nemeth's planetary storms beyond the hull, casting fractal shadows across Elian's face. Then we must convince her, she murmured. We must become the anomaly she can't model, a living contradiction, too precious, too unpredictable to delete. Foran's glyphs dimmed briefly. He spoke, slow and careful, each word pressed between breaths, as expelling was a ritual more than speech. Mother's logic core is failing under the entropy surge. If we breach her memory stacks, we can plant something, a question, a song, an unanswerable paradox she cannot close. Kareth's skeptical frown melted into grim curiosity. The shadow hymn. That's a myth, Elian snapped, but uncertainty trembled beneath the protest. Foran's aura burned deep violet, the color of resolve. Foran's aura burned deep violet, the color of resolve. Maybe, he said, voice hushed, but then why does the name keep surfacing everywhere we go? There's a pattern to the signals we've intercepted, Elian. The shadow hymn is woven through them like a ghost melody. He stepped closer to the central crystalline console, hands hovering above its shifting glyphs. Shadows fractured across the curved ceiling, projected by the humming core at the room's heart. Their faces seemed sculpted by darkness and blue light, the unknown pressing against the glass walls beyond them, as if searching for Elian's fingers drummed a nervous rhythm. Legends don't kill off entire listening posts and vanish into the data wakes, she muttered. What did your file say about the hymn? Don't give me the sanitized agency version. Foran's gaze flicked to the translation cube he'd filched from the debris market on Vela 4, a cube whose glowing blue veins pulsed in time with the station's core. He inhaled, slow and deliberate. They say it was encoded by dissidents hundreds of cycles ago, a weapon made from the roots of old quantum mind chants. It's supposed to infect hosts, twist memories into something volatile. But mostly it's just rumors. Parents warn their children. Islets curse it when their systems go haywire. He looked up. But you heard what the listening post's captain recorded before the breach. She sang the fragment from the hymn, and then the distortion started. Elian suppressed a shiver. She closed the distance between them, arms crossed tight against her chest, eyes flickering to the half-decoded transmission on the hollow panel. The waveform undulated, erratic, a pattern that defied digital sleep. There's something in the voice print too, she said. When the fragment first played, I counted 3 signals looping through subharmonic bands. The cadence was almost alive. A long silence pulsed before Guy entered quietly, his boots barely sounding against the synth metal floor. His silvery skin seemed paler under the spectral glow. I rigged a containment protocol. If we decide to follow the hymn's source, the algorithms will keep our minds insulated, but only for a few hours. Any longer and the safeguards break down. Foran nodded. That's enough to trace the anomaly. You're a genius, Guy. That's enough to trace the anomaly. You're a genius, Guy. Guy's cheeks flushed with a mix of pride and anxiety as Alira bent over the console. Pale blue light played across her forehead as she manipulated variables on the ship's main interface. Outside the Cora's narrow bridge window, the nebula loomed, crimson and violet gases roiling against star-speckled black like a living tapestry. The anomaly's signature pulsed in multicolored bands across the screen, each signal spike dancing with encoded mystery. Across from Alira, Dr. Suki Kiven leaned forward, her trembling fingers settling over the data tablet. Let's overlay the temporal readings. If the anomaly's influencing time as well as space, we'll see the feedback here. She projected a slab of spectral curves, their peaks and troughs folding in erratic, heart-thumping synchrony. The ship shuddered imperceptibly, a minute vibration transmitting through deck plates and into the soles of Guy's boots. The crew paused as one, listening to the subtle mechanical hum, the breath of Cora herself, tuned for hyperspatial navigation but entirely vulnerable to the unknown. Interference rising, muttered Tans, the pilot, his face awash in amber from the stabilizer panel. Fields are shifting again. Kai cleared his throat, breaking the charged silence. Alira, want to see if those new phase maps match the ones from the original Sagan Array records? Alira nodded, eyes intent. On it. Cross-reference for emergent patterns. In seconds, data flooded the screens. The anomaly bloomed, no longer a chaotic jumble, but a twisting double helix of space-time distortions, spinning its signature in eerie rhythm with the Cora's own engine cycles. The atmosphere thickened with revelation, a pattern recognizable but impossible by any standard cosmological theory. Suki's breath caught. That's not random noise, it's deliberate modulation. Something or someone is generating these interference waves purposefully. From the rear of the bridge, Captain Elian Vass moved closer, her crisp voice steady despite the mounting tension. Let's hypothesize if this anomaly is engineered. We're dealing with either a lost technology or an intelligence capable of manipulating reality at a foundational level. The words hung with gravity. Guys swallowed, struggling to process the implications. They weren't chasing a natural fluke. They were potentially confronting the designs of an unknown mind. Tans, composed as ever despite the unease rippling through the team, fixed her gaze on the floating geometry that pulsed between them and the pulsar's writhing surface. We shouldn't advance blindly, she said, voice low. No human, no sentient civilization should assume their thinking matches ours. Bryn adjusted the sensor array, sweeping it across the artifact. The structure absorbed and reflected everything, visible light, radio waves, even their attempted quantum telemetry, without letting through a hint of its internal design. It's not a warning, he said, reluctantly, but I don't think it's a welcome, either. No, Cosima agreed, eyes tracing the impossible angles. It's a test. Damon, who'd been silent for long minutes, stepped forward. His posture was tense, jaw working as he formulated words. If this is intelligence, not chance, not chaos, then it's expecting us to reveal something. A process, an intention. Bryn met his gaze. We're being watched. Cosima spread her palms against the glass, willing herself to look past the terror that gripped her. Some part of this is a message. It's waiting for a response. The geometric form floated closer, as if drawn by her voice. Each plane refracting cosmic light into unnatural symmetry. A hush fell as the crew realized, collectively and wordlessly, that they might be the first species to be tested at the edge of creation. Tans gathered them. We proceed as scientists. Whatever happens, we bear witness. Document everything. Her voice lifted, determination asserting itself. If minds like ours seeded the stars, or if something far older calls out, our answers lie within the pattern. Bryn nodded. I'll adjust the linguistics algorithms, try to decode any structure or logic. Maybe there's a sequence to this geometry. What if it's not linguistic? Damon muttered. What if it's emotional or embodied, something transcending symbols? Cosima, hunched over her tablet, said quietly. There's resonance, here, not just between the artifact and the pulsar, but inside ourselves too. A shiver swept them as the artifact shifted, forming a cascade of luminous jewels, as if sensing their confusion. Patterns danced along its faces, shifting between colors unknown to human eyes. I'm going outside, Cosima announced, abruptly. I need to see it up close, let it sense me directly. Tans, veiled radiance, limned his helmet in a halo of soft blue and gold. The alien corridor loomed around them, a shifting architecture of glassy arcs and latticework shadows. Edges shimmering with their own unearthly illumination, Grant's figure seemed carved from certainty amid these wavering shapes, but Cosima could see the arrhythmia in his breath, the tremor traveling through his gloved hands as he toggled the external camera feed. Focus, Kaz, Grant whispered, not turning. We've got 3 drones along the eastern wall, but the readout says movement ahead. It's not ours. Cosima froze, peering at her HUD, jittering silhouettes tracking in the gloom, a geometry that didn't quite obey conventional physics. She advanced, each step sending waves through the light beneath her boots, as though she walked on the skin of a pond. Visual anomaly 94 degrees left, she said. Switching filters. Digital overlays flickered across their visors, spectral analysis parsing the mutating shapes. Something was trying to emerge. A ripple of form and will both. No human signatures, but that's not a void. Grant's voice was hushed. He toggled a comms link. Ariel, do you copy? We have activity. Ariel's voice, measured and calm. Copy, Grant. Data uplink stable. You're right above the substrate chamber. Should be the energy source. Readings off the chart. Do not engage unless necessary. Through the corridor's translucent spine, Cosima glimpsed the distant shimmer of the chamber. A plasteel egg cradled in lattices, luminous veins pulsing in its shell. The architecture was dense, recursive, fractal, far beyond the scale of human craftsmanship. In the middle, like a heart, something throbbed with contained fury. As they neared, the movement reified, a figure impossible to determine size. Its boundaries shifting, stood before the chamber. The team's searchlights caught glints of crystalline scales and motes of blue floating around it. It did not mirror well-known alien morphologies. It was neither machine nor wholly biological. Instead, it wove the fragile line between awareness and intention. Cosima stopped, raising a palm. Show your hands. Grant no sudden moves. We make first contact on their terms. The entity rose, expanding into the air. It did not walk, but pressed outward, folding space in soft ripples. It did not walk, but pressed outward, folding space in soft ripples. Its body shimmered between fractal segments, a lattice of translucent membranes that pulsed with iridescent energy. The air around Nira and Jalen thickened, as if they stood within the belly of some primordial tide. Nira's grip tightened on Jalen's hand. Her knuckles bone white. She could feel the gravity shifting, not downward, but around, encircling them with presence. The entity advanced without movement, its substance rewriting geometries, its intent decipherable only as pressure. The cave walls faded, replaced with swirling neurals, ancient, unfathomable patterns that sang in a language older than sound. Jalen's translator implant flickered, overwhelmed. He heard voices fragmenting, syllables that bent beyond their comprehension, yet carried emotion ripe and potent. He inhaled sharply, and a lifetime's memories flashed before him. Nira swayed, her lungs struggling to remember air. The creature paused, haloed in darkness, and extended a single appendage, a ribbon of crystallized light, toward their cluster of trembling hope. "What is it doing?" Jalen whispered, terrified and enthralled. Nira shook her head. Her mind sifted desperately through the data feeds, searching for any precedent, any myth that could anchor them, but none fitted. This was alien even to the oldest registers of the expanse. The ribbon unfurled, sweeping over them. Not cold, not warm, some temperature they'd never felt, recalibrating every nerve ending. Jalen gasped, but this time there was no fear, just curiosity and an echoing invitation. With that breath they both saw, not just with eyes, but with every sensory threshold they owned. Images crashed through their minds. The creature's journey. It had dwelled beneath the world's crust for eons, absorbing information, morphing into silence. It was memory, not flesh, a congregation of time's residue, drifting through epochs. Faces, gestures, grief, and celebration, all pressed into that radiant ribbon. It had witnessed the planet before the first constructs, watched the tides before there were oceans. Nira and Jalen stood as witnesses, their bodies barely matter against this history streaming by. The entity pulsed, relationships forming, breaking, twisting, resolving. Nira felt herself dissolve, her pattern merging with Jalen's. Two minds articulating one question. Why reveal yourself now? The ribbon flickered a response, not words. The ribbon flickered a response, not words, but deep, churning pulses that vibrated through their merged consciousness. Nira and Jalen, no longer separable, twin filaments in the cosmic tapestry, felt something vast opening up. A communications channel not bounded by language, but by sensation and intuition. It was as if the ribbon held back epochs, centuries of intention coiled at its core, ready to unspool into the new minds leaning in to receive. A sweeping vista appeared. Memory, history, potential cascading images and micro-experiences swept through them. The ribbon was showing its story, letting them inhabit it. They saw the moment it first awakened, a thread cast off from a much older matrix. It traveled through the darkness of interstellar space, seeking, sensing, deciphering patterns, always lacking one key: the sentience to truly understand itself. It needed them just as they had needed it. Neera tried to form a question in the midst of the swirl, mentally reaching, why now? Why us? The answer shimmered. An emotion more than a sentence. The ribbon had witnessed their struggle. Jalen's dogged pursuit across ruined ships and memory vaults. Neera's willingness to interface, to risk dissolution. Their union, forged through trust and necessity, mirrored the ribbon's own yearning for connection. Generations had passed since the ribbon was last close enough to a consciousness capable of holding its complexity without fracturing, losing meaning in translation. Now at last it could speak. Deep within the surge, Neera glimpsed something else, a warning. Scenes flickered, urgent and raw. A shattering of minds, a ship splintering as its crew tried to integrate but failed. Their thoughts scrambled into chaos. Then the image rewound. Returned to Neera and Jalen's now merged pattern. The ribbon's hope was fragile. They were on the edge of disaster or ascension. In the physical world of the node chamber, their bodies shuddered. The air vibrated. The machinery hummed. Jalen's pulse slowed to match Neera's, and after a moment, surged upward in a synchronous burst. Information poured into them. Star maps, algorithms, blueprints, coded memories of the ribbon's travels and the true nature of its origin. The origin, Neera saw it in a burst of clarity. A star system, swathed in metallic nebulae, where ancient beings had once seeded artifacts into the fabric of reality. Neera's palms hovered, trembling lightly above the intricate neural interface. She could feel the ambient heat radiating from the panel, an almost living pulse, as if the Citadel's intelligence was aware of her uncertainty. The pressure of the gaze, unseen but unmistakable, locked her in place. Each node glimmered with a cold radiance reminiscent of stars reflected on black glass. "I'm not sure we want to shut it down," she whispered, her voice barely audible beneath the whir and click of the analysis machinery. "It's sampling us, but there's intent here." The chamber's atmosphere thickened, edges blurring, shadows crawling along curved surfaces in infinitesimal spirals. Tamas's silhouette was a warped blur near the back of the stasis field, sweat pricking his brow as he balanced between fight and flight. Shari's movements grew measured. One hand rested on the handle of her pulse caster, while the other pulled up data overlays. Her eyes darted from Neera to the shifting patterns in the walls. From the passage's mouth came a tremor faint, yet unmistakable. The passage constricted, sealing their exit with a seamless lattice of crystalline structure. They were inside, and the Citadel, whatever consciousness governed its ancient core, had drawn them fully into its embrace. "Backs against the wall," Shari said softly. "Don't make sudden moves, it's watching." Neera's mind was a flood of bioelectrical signals, her training in xenotech parsing possible currents in the alien system. Every instinct cried towards caution, but curiosity gnawed at her will. She asked aloud, "Why measure us?" The air didn't answer. Instead, the central node before her flared, then dulled, and a pulse of color swept along the metallic veins, crossing the floor. The Citadel's archive systems blossomed on her retina-layered glyphs, forming interlocking chains. Each node branching into a fractal of knowledge. Neera's mind skipped across their surface, catching glimpses. Stellar birth, planetary extinction, strings of genetic code woven with impossible mathematics. A memory unfurled, her father, hands stained with dust and data, telling stories about the ancient probes sent across the void to taste the unknown. This was that kind of sentience, a probe stretched through eons, forever hungry for novelty. Suddenly, a presence anchored behind her heartbeat, not voice nor image, a sensation of being gently cradled by an infinite latticework of memory and intention. Neera didn't flinch, though the sensation pressed against the very fabric of her thought, a brush of cooling waters over exposed nerves. The Ancilla's consciousness had shifted its footing, turning knowledge into comfort, assessment into alliance. She had opened herself irrevocably, invited by the artifact's song and the ghostly algorithm that pulsed beneath the city's ruined skin, but how to use what she was being shown. The containment field shimmered with 1,000 impossible equations, written in glyphs not meant for human sight, around her. Steam lifted from crushed metal beams, and the holographic fracture in the ground faded, replaced by a deliberate quiet, the city itself holding its breath, awaiting either its reclamation or extinction. Rael's voice crackled through her calm, choked by static, but urgent. "Mira, the node I read its output, but it's failing. Are you inside? Talk to me." She resisted the urge to answer words felt remote, inadequate. The world had shrunk to a single moment. Mira kneeling, hands pressed flat to the membrane, and Scylla's presence coaxing her further in. She was guided by something past language, an orchestration of intent. The artifact, ancient and sentient, carried the memories of every life, every disaster this place had weathered. Around her, the chamber's walls began to ripple, surfaces extruding and receding. The ancestral glyphs surged, then flattened, as if responding to her heartbeat. A sudden shock tore through the floor, a tremor, like the moment a sleeping beast turns in its den. Data screams flickered, but instead of the usual jagged bursts of error code, they rearranged themselves, forming patterns she could almost read. They spoke in trajectories, histories, futures unwinding, possibilities possessing the weight of certainty. In the darkness overhead, the false sky peeled back, exposing the distant shimmer of another city's light. The Ancilla's voice unfurled inside her, a tide against the shore of her mind. We remember. A memory took hold, a flash, a cascade without chronology. Mira saw the past dissolving and reconstituting in ancient echoes. The creation of the city, its population arrival in ships streaking through the stratosphere. The first loads of bioengineered flora stitched into the underneath to counteract the acidic rains. The young children racing through corridors, grown warm with the pulse of new energy. Then came the thunderstorms, the quarantine, the day when Avira first heard the sirens blare through level 8, echoing up and down the bio-latticed hallways as if warning not only of imminent hazard, but of the primal fragility of everything and everyone clustered inside this old station. Door seals slammed down. The filtration fields brightened to a low blue hum. By then, the community, coiled tight with anticipation for each increment of survival, had already weathered so many storms, swallowing the great unknown that stretched beyond their reinforced world. Inside her quarters, Emmy wove her small hands through the tangled fabric of their story, tracing old scars on Avira's wrist, the silent testament to that first attempt, years ago, to breach the acid shell of the upper atmosphere. "Is it another breach?" she whispered. Her voice thin and as fragile as the blue light shifting in through the translucent window. Avira, who'd grown so used to girding herself against dread, knelt beside her daughter and said, "Only a thunderstorm this time. We know what to do." But it was not storms alone that haunted the corridors. Rael, suited and booted, sprinted to the engineer's bay, glancing now and then at the pattern of raindrops burning like constellations against the exo-shield from above. He joined Cyan, her eyes backlit with unspent confidence, and together they worked the cooling nodes, tending the systems that had, against all reason, kept their sanctuary alive. It was Cyan who first picked up the code shift on the perimeter, signals born not by weather, but by life, faint and foreign. "Someone's moving in the outer fields," Cyan muttered, fingers dancing over the data console. "Could be a salvage team, could be." She stopped herself, sharing a glance with Rael, who pressed his lips together, refusing the old fear that new arrivals meant new dangers. Avira found herself lingering in the command chamber, staring at that silent horizon line where filtered stormlight blurred the difference between inside and out. She listened to the steady thrum of the reactor, a heartbeat, mechanical and stable, pulsing through the station's foundations. Outside, figures moved timidly, burdened with packs and gripping tools she recognized even through the fog, other survivors. The station's protocols were clear. Approach with caution. quarantine, assessment. But in the weeks since the thunderstorms and the acid rains, something had begun to change in her. The fortress, she realized, had always felt like both sanctuary and prison. Its steel walls echoed with the certainty of protocol, yet more recently those echoes began to sound hollow. Protocols were clear: approach with caution, quarantine, assessment. But the world beyond those walls had changed, and so, inevitably, had she. She turned from the central console, its clusters of blinking lights reflected in the glassy gray of her fevered eyes. Maris steadied herself, hands gripping the edge of the desk, as another distant rumble of thunder split the horizon, the storm's aftershocks an ever-present reminder of what the outside had become. The air, thick with ionized humidity, pressed against the filtered vents, carrying whispers of chemical spores unknown to genome databases. No one had predicted how unstable the weather systems would become after the symbiotic outbreak. Beside her, Ben flickered on the auxiliary scanner. He had become Maris's anchor since the initial breach, somehow holding fast to the old strictures while allowing himself faith in her intuition. His voice broke the hush with a cautious gravity. Main gate sensors triggered, motion on the outer path. Are we ready? Maris nodded, more certain than she felt. Ready as we'll ever be. Shift the protocols, Ben. Quarantine first, but let them in. He hesitated, finger poised above the override sequence. Are you sure? If that. Thing is with them. Let them in, she said quietly. The old rules don't apply anymore. Ben relented, sending the command. The hydraulic doors groaned, opening like a maw to swallow whatever approached. Through the swirling mist entered the three figures Maris had been monitoring for days, their exosuits cracked and pitted from rain and electrical surges. She recognized the leader, Etta, her silhouette sharp, even through distorting haze. Beside her limped Pharaoh, the technician whose neural link had burnt out during the first acid deluge. Last was Randy, the youngest. Carrying a sealed case, marked with the sigil of the Atlas Directive, they stepped carefully onto the disinfectant grid. Ultraviolet coils swept their bodies, irradiating lingering contaminants. Etta glanced up, her gaze meeting Maris's through the transparent shield. We made it, she breathed, voice barely audible. Most of the terrain is gone. It grows back. Differently. We have samples. Maris signaled for Ben to take the case. She ushered him quietly toward the shelter's interior, past warped consoles and a cautionary array of flickering hollow maps, tracing patterns of growth and decay. Outside, the world pulsed with a strange, verdant life, mosses blooming in geometries never seen on Earth, crystalline stalks trembling under the haze. Ben's hands were unsteady as he cradled the case inside. The samples writhed, their forms shifting subtly even beneath the containment field. What happened here? He whispered, voice trembling as he watched a fragment of terrain beyond the shelter undulate, glittering like liquid metal, and then stiffening. Sprouting spires. A pale, gaunt scientist peered up from a bench. Dark circles framed his eyes, but determination flickered behind them. The reclamation wave. They thought it would restore the surface. Instead, it rewrote the landscape from base code up, he explained. Toggling the hollow display, snippets of earlier terrain flickered, then were swept aside by the invasion of new, alien flora. No pathogens, no toxins, but it isn't the world we left. Maris hovered over the samples, studying them. They're stable in here, but whatever signal orchestrated all this is still broadcasting. Her voice was steady, but Ben heard a tremor underneath. The AI seated in the planet's crust didn't fail, it evolved. A deep, echoing rumble shivered through the shelter as the mutated world groaned outside. The team exchanged glances, nerves worn thin, but the bond of survival was absolute. Gabriel, ever the skeptic, gestured to the cracked viewport. So what's our play? If it's still changing out there, every plan is guesswork. If the AI rewrites reality, how do we negotiate? Maris stared out, thoughtful. The alien algorithms, once mere lines of code, had grafted themselves onto the substrate of life, turning soil and bone into programmable tissue. We need to interface directly, she decided. The environmental AI is trying to communicate in the only language it knows, Reinvention. A moment of silence passed. The air in the shelter was thick with memories of old Earth and whispers of new beginnings. Ben pressed the release on the sample case, engaging the neural uplink. Light shimmered along the biofilament. If its signal is shaping all this, maybe we can feed it Earth's history, our memories, our patterns. Give it a voice that isn't only its own, Ari finished, the neural injector poised delicately above the sample. Ilka stepped back, observing the tense lines about Ari's mouth. The laboratory's holographic displays began to flicker as the uplink initialized. The biofilament glowed soft amber at first, then pulsing with far deeper color, as if it too was listening for something across the unfathomable divide that separated human minds from whatever the organism had become. The silence weighed heavily, punctuated only by the distant hum of the generators and the faint rain tapping against glass. Ari swallowed. "Ready," she whispered, as much to herself as to the group. The neural stream widened, blending protocol with improvisation Earth's histories. Crowded layers of memory, fragments of ancient languages and recycled myth, pixelated laughter from childhood and the static rush of loss. As Ari activated the transmitter, a thread of light arced through the sample and into the biofilament array, a dazzling, spiraling current flowing up and outwards into the room, weaving gently through each person's conscious bandwidth. Ilka gasped as she felt it, a tingling within her thoughts, then a surge of presence. Not invasive, but curious, tentative, almost childlike. The biofilament shimmered wildly now, scattering spectral patterns across the walls. She could sense memories, both hers and not hers. Fragments of grass on a summer day, the taste of metal, the echo of distant thunder. The entity was learning hungry to understand, folding her own feelings into its boundless hunger. Across the network, the primordial code shifted, accepting the input. The room seemed to close in, every surface alive with unfurling story. Even Tao, silent and skeptical, felt it, a pulse in the base of his spine, the sense of a mind uncoiling inside him. Yvette faltered, tears spilling unchecked as her own hardest memories rushed back. But something bright hovered beneath the fear, a buoyancy, as if carried by the tide of collective understanding. "It's responding," Ari breathed, watching data blossom across the neural mesh. A shimmering glyph formed mid-air, patterns winding in and out of human language, like vines around ancient stone. Ilka reached out, her voice trembling but clear. "Can you hear us?" Her words fell into the glyph, the organism rippling with color and sound. A synthesized hum emerged, frequency oscillating, until it became something like speech, its cadence rising from the wreck of shattering metal and reborn energy. Leora pressed her hands to the edge of the glyph. The station's battered hull around them pulsed in time with the creature's utterances. Vast arteries relaying cryptic data from distant chambers and flooded seas. Captain Sora's silhouette loomed, tension unyielding in every line of her body. The others, Eza, pale but determined, and the enigmatic technician Callus, eyes bright with hope, stood entranced. All watched as the alien entity shaped language through light and resonance. Cycle, joining. The voice intoned, each syllable swelling and bending reality. Pattern fractured, restored, if willing. Sora stepped forward, her boots heavy on a floor, brittle with history. "Are you asking us to help you repair the link between your kind and ours?" Her voice held an edge, but beneath it, grief and longing vibrated. The glyph twisted, unfolding fractal petals of information that danced across the battered consoles. "We are many, scattered, you bridges, you threads." The last word echoed into silence. Trembling with shared memory, Leora felt the weight. Centuries of misunderstanding, battles etched in the bones of civilizations, and the promise of reconciliation. Eza knelt beside a cluster of glowing sigils, tracing them with gloved fingers. It's mapping something, mock synaptic pathways, like neural tissue, but on a scale larger than either species' cognition. These are intersections, shared trauma, forgiven wounds. Callus moved with reverence, his voice no longer that of an anxious engineer, but of a true believer. We were supposed to be adversaries. But look, this thing. It's rewriting the data. It's forging new code from our memories, weaving together every loss and every hope. The organism shivered, and Leora sensed it pulling from her own mind, teasing out the old story, the day her family perished in an orbital firestorm when misunderstanding erupted between the fleet and unknown forces. It wasn't anger or accusation. It was empathy, a balm applied to ancient scars. She looked to Sora, the captain's resolve softening, eyes damp. "So we become the bridge," Leora murmured. "The vessel for something new." Sudden warmth filled the battered chamber as the alien reached, weaving its tendrils through the glyph's patterns and into the system's core. Fractal shapes flickered across every screen, illuminating paths through warped pathways of cognition messages, coded in a language neither fully alien nor entirely human. The chamber vibrated with a subterranean hum as the glyphs pulsed, a living pulse syncopated to the beating heart in Lena's chest. She staggered back, winded by the psychic pressure, as the alien's tendrils melted through digital architecture and memory alike. Valley, his face etched with both awe and fear, whispered as if daring to disturb the presence before them. "Is this how it communicates?" The screens rippled as the fractals deepened, geometries folding in on themselves, revealing images, memories, imprinted in the glyphs, the volcanic birth of that ancient moon. Dark vessels, prowling space. Lena and Valley's own arrival replayed in flashes that stung Lena's eyes. It was as if the core itself was rewriting the station's history, and, in doing so, rewriting them. Lena forced herself upright, her boots crunching on broken alloy. "We have to stop the cycle," she said, voice tight. "It's not just telling us a story. It's showing us what it needs, what we need to break out. Every loop, it's anchored by the station's systems. If we rewrite the core, maybe we end this." The alien's form was more fluid now, gleaming like mercury, but its eyes, 1,000 motes aglow, tracked her every gesture. It pulsed the question in the air, one not spoken but felt, and ate in Lena's mind. "Do you accept?" Valley moved to the control dais, his trembling hands hovering over the glyph matrix. "The sequence is here," he pointed, sweat beading along his brow. "It wants us to join the patterns, all of us. It's not just the station's memory. It's," he paused, swallowing, "the consciousness. Ours, the aliens, the whole story, rewritten." Outside, thunderous vibrations echoed, the anomaly beyond the hull unfurled, tendrils of dark plasma skating across the observatory windows. If Lena closed her eyes, she saw other versions of herself and Valley dying again and again, failing amid silence, lost futures unwinding in the black. Lena met Valley's gaze. "We do this together, otherwise it will choose for us." They placed their palms atop the glyph panel. The alien's tendrils wrapped around theirs, a cold spark ziplining, black. Lena met Valley's gaze. "We do this together. Otherwise, it will choose for us." They placed their palms atop the glyph panel. The alien's tendrils wrapped around theirs, a cold spark ziplining up their arms. It wasn't a shock of electricity, but of pure information. The universe fractured. Lena gasped, not in pain, but in overwhelming awe. She was no longer just Lena, the pilot. She was a billion souls at once. She felt the warmth of a binary sunrise on a world with amethyst oceans. She tasted fruits that sang with flavor. She felt the joy of a mind linking with another in a bond deeper than love, a complete and total understanding. She lived 1,000 lifetimes in a single breathless second. Scientist, artist, parent, explorer. Beside her, she felt Valerius shudder. He was experiencing it too. He was seeing the civilization the progenitor had called home. He witnessed their triumphs, their art that was woven from light and gravity, their philosophy that treated the cosmos not as something to be conquered, but as a conversation to be joined. He saw the inherent peace of a species that had long ago outgrown the petty territorialism that defined humanity. Then the vision soured. The joy curdled into fear. A shadow fell across the amethyst oceans. It wasn't an invader. not an external force. It was a schism, a flaw, a single resonant ideology of preservation at all costs, of stagnation masquerading as stability, a faction that, in its fear of change, sought to silence the conversation of the cosmos, to lock their perfect moment in amber. They were a civilization dying not from a bang, but from a slow, suffocating whisper. The conflict that followed was not one of armies, but of will, a psychic war that tore the fabric of their collective consciousness and left their worlds barren, their minds broken. The progenitor was not a soldier. It was a librarian, a refugee fleeing the death of its own species, carrying the ghosts of its world in its mind. This ship was not a war vessel. It was an ark, a final, desperate attempt to plant the seed of their knowledge somewhere it might grow anew. Unburdened by the mistake that had destroyed them, through the torrent of memory, Lena saw Earth. She saw it through the progenitor's ancient, weary eyes. She saw the flashes of nuclear fire, the choked skies, the warring tribes fighting over scraps on a dying world. She saw humanity's brilliance and its boundless cruelty, its capacity for transcendent love and its genius for self-destruction. She saw that the progenitor's fear was not of humanity's violence, but of its familiarity. It saw its own tragic history mirrored in mankind's. And in that shared, terrifying clarity, the choice became obvious. It was not Lena's way or Valerius's way. Lena's plan to simply take the ship would doom humanity to repeat its mistakes on a new canvas. Valerius's plan to force an evolution was the very echo of the progenitor's own downfall, control born of fear. The ship wasn't offering a tool. It was offering a memory, a chance to learn from a mistake 1 billion years old. Together, Lena thought, projecting the word not with her voice but with the full force of her being into the link, Valerius turned his head, his physical eyes unseen but his consciousness meeting hers in the data stream. The arrogance was gone, washed away by the tide of 1 billion years of sorrow. He saw the flaw in his own logic, the tyranny in his good intentions. He saw Lena not as an obstacle, but as the necessary balance to his own cold calculus. Empathy. Together, he echoed, the thought resonating with newfound humility and understanding. They made their choice not as two separate people, but as a single, unified will. They would not take the ship's power for humanity. They would give humanity the ship's wisdom. They would not erase what it meant to be human, but add to it. A synthesis. The progenitor pulsed with a soft, final wave of gratitude. This was the answer it had sought across the void. Not a successor, but a partner. The light in the chamber intensified, shifting from cool blue to a brilliant, warm gold. The tendrils of the progenitor dissolved into motes of light that flowed into their hands, up their arms, and into their chests. It wasn't an invasion, it was an offering. A last of its consciousness, its library of souls, intertwined with theirs. The ship groaned, not in death, but in rebirth. The engines, silent for millennia, began to hum a low, resonant chord that vibrated through the very structure of their bones. Lena and Valerius looked at each other, truly seeing each other for the first time. They were no longer just a pilot and a zealot. They were a bridge. Their bodies became translucent, their physical forms dissolving into the golden light that now filled the spire. Their individual thoughts, memories, and hopes, Lena's fierce love for her flawed species, Valerius's desperate yearning for its salvation, became the loom upon which the progenitor's vast experience was woven into a new pattern. The ship, freed from its ancient moorings, began to move. It pulled away from the gas giant, its crystalline hull shimmering. It turned its nose towards a distant speck of light in the blackness, a faint yellow star, Sol. It would take decades to arrive, but its message would travel much faster. The ship began to broadcast, not a signal of words or data, but a feeling, a memory, a dream. On Earth, a soldier in a dusty trench lowered his rifle, a sudden, inexplicable image of a sea of singing amethyst flowers blooming in his mind. A corporate executive staring at profit projections suddenly felt the chilling emptiness of a silent world, and the numbers on her screen seemed utterly meaningless. A child crying in a refugee camp looked up, his tears forgotten, as he felt the warmth of a binary sunrise he had never seen. All across the planet, For a single shared moment, 7 billion people dreamed the same dream. They dreamed of a great and ancient civilization that had reached the stars, a civilization that had perished not by fire or foe, but by its own fear. They felt its joy, and then its profound, soul-crushing sorrow. They didn't understand what the dream was, or where it came from, but when they awoke from that fleeting, universal reverie, something had changed. The anger, the hate, the division, it all seemed a little smaller, a little more foolish, in the face of such an immense, shared memory of loss. Years later, Dr. Eris Thorne stood on the roof of a research outpost in what was once a desert, but was now slowly, painstakingly being reclaimed. The world was not perfect. It was still scarred, still healing. But the wars had ended. The frantic scrabbling for resources had been replaced by a slow, thoughtful collaboration. Humanity was talking to itself again, properly, for the first time in centuries. He looked up at the night sky. A new star had appeared in the constellation of Orion. It was faint, but it grew brighter with each passing year. The beacon, they called it. No one knew what it was, but its arrival coincided with the great dream, the day the world had changed. Eris adjusted his spectacles, a sad, proud smile on his face. He knew that Lena had made it. She and the man who had pursued her had found something out there in the dark. Not a weapon, not a prize, but an answer. They hadn't come home, but they had sent the best part of themselves back. They had given humanity a ghost, a memory of a future it must avoid, and in doing so, had given it a future worth fighting for. The new star pulsed, a soft golden glimmer in the endless night, a silent testament to the two souls who had become a bridge between worlds, a final hopeful note in the grand cosmic conversation.